Well, the Z is an airplane that I think encapsulates the most beautiful lines of the 1930s air racing airplanes. It's always been my favorite shaped airplane of the period. And there really never has been a really good replica made of it. And I think the airplane deserves a chance to come to life again. The original only lasted 120 days or so, actually 107 days. And it's really neat to be able to see it come alive again.
Tell me a little bit on the history of the Z, why it was built, what it accomplished.
It was built in a last-ditch effort to keep the Granville Brothers Aircraft Company alive, basically. They were manufacturing really neat sport airplanes, but the Depression came in and made things really, really tough to make a living that way. It became apparent that the prizes in the national air races were so significant that it might be worth building an airplane just to attempt to win the Thompson Trophy from the national air races that were held in Labor Day weekend every year. So they got together about 6 or 7 weeks before the race and decided they were going to build, design, and finance a racing airplane to enter the Thompson Trophy race. And they accomplished it, and they went there and they won, beating Jimmy Doolittle in the Laird Super Solution. They went about 237 miles an hour in the Thompson Trophy race and brought back close to $15,000, just this airplane alone.
Wow. So they built the original in about 7 weeks?
Yes, about 7.5 weeks from a blank sheet of paper. And they had no money either. They had to go out and sell shares, and they formed the Springfield Air Racing Association during the day. And Bob Hall was very instrumental in all this. He was the guy that believed that it really could get done. He generated the drawings and also generated a lot of the financing. He wasn't afraid to go out there and pound the pavement. And of course, Granny Granville was the big visionary in the whole company, and was enough of a visionary to see that what Hall was up to could really pay off, and it did.
Now this plane won everything it was entered in, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And so it ran in the 1930 Thompson Trophy race?
1931 National Air Races is really the only event it was ever entered in, a week-long event. It ran in 5 races total in that event and won all of them. It was super overkill in a lot of the races that it won.
Let's see, Bales flew it, right?
Yeah, Lowell Bales and Bob Hall both flew it.
Didn't Bales lap Doolittle in the Thompson? Wasn't he a lap ahead? Or?
Yes, Doolittle had engine problems though. You know, Doolittle had an incredible victory in the Bendix race that year in the Super Solution, but they pretty much used the engine up. And what they had hoped to do was to put a geared version of the same engine on the airplane for the pylon events. But the airplane was not that well constructed and couldn't stay in rig to aerodynamically handle the torque and the forces that geared engine produced. So they had to put the Bendix cross-country engine back in the airplane. And that engine was kind of worn out, and that's what did Doolittle in. So I think after the 5th or 6th lap, Doolittle was pretty much out of it and ended up having to land even before he never finished the race.
But there was nothing that could keep up with this, was there?
That was the only airplane that had a shot at it, and when the engine went sour, the Z clearly pulled way, way ahead of everything else. It was the first year the Waddell Williams racers showed up at Cleveland as well, so it was a significant victory.
Okay, let's change tack here for just a second. Tell me about your dream. I mean, is this something that you've been wanting to do for a long, long, long?
Well, seeing Delmar Benjamin and fly his airplane and seeing what Steve Wolf had accomplished designing that airplane and having just restored a monocoupe, I decided that I really wanted to get involved in something big-time golden age. And this airplane was it, you know. And it's one of those things you don't really think too much about the specifics of flying it, the whole 6,000 hours you're spending in construction, but it's constantly in the back of your mind. And as you're getting closer to the completion date, it's very similar to a kind of a little brief anecdote. An attorney friend of mine once told me, and there's nothing that focuses the mind like a hanging in the morning. There's nothing that focuses the mind than having to land at Gee Bee. That's for sure.
Yeah. What did as far as how the airplane turned out, does it exceed what your dream was, or is it,
Well, we tried our very, very best in this airplane to not only be cosmetically, to strive for cosmetic excellence, but also just to build everything as straight and as proper and use the best possible hardware. No expense was spared in doing this airplane. If there was an expensive, better way to do it, that's the way we did do it. And you know, because the construction process itself was such a big part of this for me, I really wanted it to be an end in itself. You know, just the idea of building the airplane. When you get really close to something like this, though, you know where the imperfections are, and I'm the type of person that immediately when I'm done with something like this, it takes me a long time before I can look at it again and really enjoy looking at it, because I just see it as kind of like an albatross sometimes at this point.
I feel that way about my work. It takes a couple of years before I can go back and look. Now, what was it like seeing? Well, let's talk about your initial taxi test. When this was totally done and you first got in the cockpit, what did it feel like?
Well, we finished the canopy so last minute on this airplane before it was displayed at Sun and Fun in Lakeland. So I never had the opportunity to sit in it with the canopy on until it was already a running taxiing airplane. And the canopy is ultra small in this airplane, and it's not for claustrophobic people. In fact, you can feel the heat from your own face radiating back at you. The canopy is that tight. And I was worried about that because I do tend to be somewhat of a claustrophobic person. However, once the engine started and once the airplane started to move, and it was so unlike anything else I've ever taxied, it's a lot heavier than most airplanes this size and has a lot more momentum associated with it, and of course the engine produces a lot more thrust as well, so the forces are just a lot bigger on it. I never even thought about that canopy again.
It's kind of like sitting in a time machine.
It really is. It really is. Yeah, there's no view like the views in the two Gee Bee Super Sportsters that I've sat in. It's one of the all-time classic views in aviation. The R2 is even more radical, of course, than this airplane is, but it's still, when you turn that mag switch on and that starter's turning and you see the smoke come out of those 9 exhaust stacks coming back at you, it is a really special thing.
Now that you've taxied it and you've gotten a feel for the aircraft, how would you rate the pilots in the 30s that flew something like this?
Well, they didn't do too much taxiing back then. You know, these airplanes had tail skids and very poor brakes, and they basically pointed them into the wind when they took off and landed on a big field, pulled the stick back and kind of waited for them to come to a stop. That's a technique they used. You know, nowadays we have to actually taxi on narrow taxiways and operate on general aviation airports. I think that the way they flew these airplanes, that I'd be scared to death to fly it that way. I mean, those people really had courage. They really did. You know, this airplane, when it got to Cleveland, we got a copy of Bob Hall's logbook. This airplane at most had 6 hours total time on it when it entered the Thompson Trophy race. How proficient can anybody be? And you know, this is a radical aircraft. There was nothing like this prior to it.
What was it like watching the first flight?
Listening to the first flight was probably as exciting as watching it for me. But to all of a sudden see something that's no longer a project but is an airplane, and that no longer can be thought of as a collection of pieces or a static display or something you truck to a fly-in, it came to life. And it came to life in a way that was so much bigger than life than I could ever imagine. you study pictures over and over and over again for the years we've been building this project, and you get embedded into your mind the shape of the airplane in various attitudes, and then to actually see it in full living life color and hear it, it's just really a special thing.
Exceeded your expectations?
Oh, absolutely. To see it fly one time exceeded my expectations.
And return safely.
Right.
What's the future going to hold for the Z?
We're working that out right now. It's still a big question mark. There's some little problems we have to fix on the airplane, some teething problems, and after we get those worked out, there's a possibility that Del Mar may end up flying this airplane in air shows. He may purchase it. I may elect to fly it. I may not. It may end up in a museum. We really don't know at this stage.
Anything else you'd like to tell me? Any good stories during the building process? It's kind of an open soapbox question here.
Well, many of the things that we worried about and sweated about the most prior to actually doing them turned out to be a lot easier than we had thought, and some of the easier things we thought turned out to be a little more difficult. But I have to really praise my partner in this, Kevin Kimball. Not only is he a person that drew this airplane up from very sketchy details, and I think it is extraordinarily accurate. This is probably the most accurate air racing replica that's ever been done. But I also have to praise him in his ability to organize a shop and ability to organize the construction of a project like this. We wasted very, very little time, and that's why we were able to build this airplane, two of us, in less than 3 years from scratch, working part-time. And, we stayed friends through it all, which I think is pretty neat.